You will be mine for 30 nights. The Duke bought her, not expecting she would change everything. Hello, a very warm welcome to this literary journey into the dark heart of Victorian England. Today I'm sharing a story with you that crosses time to touch on issues as relevant today as they were in 1877. Female dignity, the power of choices, and the difference between possessing and loving. Prepare to meet Genevieve, a young woman who was tossed like a coin in a sinister bet, but who discovered that even in the most degrading circumstances, the human soul can flourish. This is a story of shadows and gardens, of contracts and freedom, of silences that say more than 1,000 words. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? What city holds you as we embark on this journey into the past together? And if this story touches your heart as it touched mine writing it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave that precious like. Your support keeps these narratives that need to be told alive. Now take a deep breath. Close your eyes for a moment. Smell the aroma of old roses and rain on stone. Hear the creak of carriages on gravel roads. The story begins. Autumn 1877, Yorkshire and Sussex, England. The night of October 5th, 1877, smelled of Cuban cigars and masculine desperation. In the private salon of the Gentleman's Retreat, a club where only the most illustrious gentlemen of London could set foot, the dense, smoky air bore silent witness to the degradation of the English nobility. Augustus Reginald Ashford held his cards with trembling fingers. Sweat trickled down his right temple, navigating the poorly trimmed greying beard. His eyes, once blue and noble like his daughter's, now held the cloudy yellow of alcohol and sleepless nights. Before him, stacked like paper tombstones, were £15,000 in promissory notes signed with his own hand. Across the polished mahogany table, Sebastian Alaric Thornhill, the Duke of Thornhill, observed him with the expression of one studying a particularly repulsive insect. At 32, Sebastian bore the marble-carved countenance of his Norman ancestors, but his grey eyes held a coldness that went beyond lineage. It was the coldness of one who had known betrayal in its most intimate form, and had decided never again to allow himself to feel. They called him the Iron Duke, not for the mining fortune he had inherited, but for the unshakable temper of his heart. The cards were revealed. 4 queens against 3 kings. Augustus felt the world collapse. There was nothing left. Ashford Manor was already mortgaged, the family jewels sold. Even the riding horses had been auctioned off the previous month. Only one thing of value remained. The wall clock struck midnight when Augustus spoke the words that would seal his only daughter's fate. His voice, drunk and hoarse, cut the silence like a rusty blade. My daughter, your grace, Genevieve, 21 years old, educated, virtuous, 30 nights under your roof, in exchange for the total forgiveness of the debts. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to hold its flames. The other 3 gentlemen present looked away, ashamed to witness such a fall. Sebastian leaned forward slowly. A spark of something dangerous lit in his eyes. Not desire, but a morbid curiosity. How far could a man fall? How far was noble honor just a facade of hypocrisy? 30 nights, he repeated, tasting each syllable as if it were bitter wine. And what exactly, Lord Ashford, do you expect me to do with your daughter during these 30 nights? Augustus swallowed hard. Whatever your grace desires. Company at the table, entertainment. She plays the piano exquisitely, and you presume I buy women for my bed. Sebastian's voice was a blade of ice. I have had enough of wives, Lord Ashford. I buried one. I have no interest in collecting more. But even as he said it, Sebastian picked up a pen, not because he wanted the girl, but because he wished to witness, with the cruelty of a naturalist, just how far the rot of the aristocracy could descend. It would be an anthropological experiment. 30 nights observing how a noble young woman would react to being treated as a commodity. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was a dark desire in him not to be alone in his bitterness. The contract was drafted right there on the club's letterhead, witnessed, sealed. Augustus signed with a shaky hand. Sebastian with firm and elegant calligraphy. When he finished, the Duke dropped a velvet pouch onto the table. The jingle of gold coins echoed obscenely. 50 guineas, he said, rising. A symbolic payment for the merchandise. I wouldn't want you to accuse me of theft later. Augustus grabbed the pouch with pathetic greed. I will be at Ashford Manor on the 8th of October at noon, Sebastian continued, adjusting the cuffs of his immaculate shirt. I expect your daughter to be prepared. And, Lord Ashford, pray she is more worthy of the name she bears than you have proven to be tonight. The door closed behind him with a definitive sound. Augustus was left alone, clutching the pouch to his chest as tears of self-destruction streamed down his face. 3 days later, At 6 in the morning on October 8th, Genevieve Marguerite Ashford was in the conservatory of Ashford Manor when her father finally told her. She wore a simple grey cotton dress, her brown hair pinned in a practical bun. Her hands, delicate but calloused from work, held pruning shears. Ever since her mother had died 4 years prior, she was the one who kept the estate running, managing the few remaining servants, negotiating with creditors, cultivating the vegetable garden that fed them. She knew her father gambled. She knew about the debts, but she had never imagined how far his weakness could take them. When Augustus finished explaining, the pruning shears fell from her hands, sticking into the damp earth like a small, defeated sword. 30 nights, she repeated, and her voice did not tremble. It never trembled. She had learned early that tears were a luxury women in her position could not afford. You sold me as a prostitute to a duke for 30 nights. It's not like that, Jenny. He just wants company, conversation. Father. The coldness in that single word was sharper than any scream. Do not insult me with euphemisms. I know exactly what I am now. A debt paid in flesh. She looked at the garden she had cultivated, at the autumn sky tinged with grey and silver, at the house she had loved. Then she lifted her chin with the dignity Augustus had long since lost. What time does he arrive? Noon. Then I have 6 hours to prepare. She turned to enter the house but stopped at the threshold. Without looking back, she said, When I return, Father, if I return, do not expect me to still call you that. That title, like so many others in our family, has just lost all meaning. At 11:55 in the morning, Genevieve descended the main staircase of Ashford Manor for the last time as a free woman. She wore her best dress, a dark blue like a stormy sky with no jewels because they had all been sold. She carried only a small leather case with basic clothing and her watercolor sketchbooks. She carried no hopes. Those too had been sold. The sound of hooves echoed on the gravel drive. Genevieve positioned herself at the door, back straight, hands clasped in front of her. When the sealed carriage stopped, pulled by 4 black Frisian horses as dark as night, she did not flinch. The carriage door opened. Sebastian Alaric Thornhill descended with the predatory grace of a wolf. In the daylight he was even more imposing. Tall, broad-shouldered under the flawless black coat, angular features that seemed carved by a particularly severe artist. But it was his eyes that held the attention, grey as steel, intelligent, void of compassion. He studied her for a long moment. Genevieve held his gaze without flinching. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her cower. "Miss Ashford," he said finally, with a slight incline of his head. The courtesy was more of an insult than a respectful gesture. Punctual, a rare virtue. "Your Grace." Her voice was controlled, musical, icy. "My father explained the terms of the transaction. I presume you have some contract for me to sign. I prefer everything documented. Clever prostitutes always secure payment in writing." A muscle in Sebastian's jaw twitched. He hadn't expected this. He had expected tears, pleas, feminine hysteria, not this cutting coldness that mirrored his own. "Get in the carriage," he said curtly. "We will discuss the details during the journey. I would prefer to discuss them here, in front of witnesses." "You are in no position to prefer anything, Miss Ashford." "No, Your Grace, I am not. But I still prefer clarity. My father was certainly vague about the details of my servitude." Sebastian pulled a document from the inner pocket of his coat. He held it out to her. Genevieve read it quickly, searching for legal traps. The text was surprisingly direct. 30 consecutive nights under the roof of Thornhill Castle. Behavior appropriate to the ducal presence. Availability to accompany the Duke at meals and social activities as requested. And a specific clause that made her raise her eyes, surprised. "The Duke of Thornhill shall not require carnal favors from the contractee. This is social companionship, not concubinage." "Surprised?" Sebastian asked, reading her expression. "I had enough of an unfaithful wife to know that I do not buy what cannot be truly given. I prefer honest solitude to purchased company, Miss Ashford. But your father gambled and lost, and I accept payments of debts no matter how grotesquely they are offered." Genevieve signed. The pen scratched the paper like a nail on glass. When she finished, Sebastian put the document away. "Is there anything you need to take from the house?" "Only my dignity, Your Grace, and that fortunately neither of you can carry for me." She entered the carriage without looking back. She did not say goodbye to her father, who watched from a second-story window with a trembling glass of brandy in his hands. Some goodbyes were better left unsaid. The door closed. The carriage rocked into motion, and Genevieve Marguerite Ashford departed for Thornhill Castle, towards a fate she had not chosen, but which she would face with the only thing she had left, her head held high. The rain began to fall as they left Sussex behind. The journey to Yorkshire lasted 6 hours in heavy silence. The rain hammered the carriage roof in a monotonous rhythm, like a clock counting down the minutes of lost freedom. Genevieve remained rigid in her burgundy velvet seat, staring fixedly out the window as the English landscape paraded by in shades of dark green and grey. Sebastian occupied the opposite seat, leafing through papers he had taken from a leather briefcase. Occasionally his eyes would lift to study her. Genevieve felt the weight of that gaze but refused to meet it. It was a small victory, but the only ones left to her were small. Through the fogged glass, she watched Sussex turn into Nottinghamshire, then Derbyshire, until they finally reached the wild hills of Yorkshire. The landscape had become rougher, more vertical. Limestone cliffs emerged from the earth like ancient bones, and the wind howled through the ravines with the voice of a banshee. As the sun began to set, staining the leaden clouds with bloody veins of orange, Thornhill Castle finally revealed itself. Genevieve held her breath. The castle rose atop a steep cliff, a fortress of grey stone that seemed to have grown organically from the rocks. Pointed towers pierced the stormy sky. Narrow windows watched the valley below like suspicious eyes. Thick walls, built in the 12th century to withstand Norman sieges, still maintained their implacable solidity. It was magnificent. It was terrifying. It was exactly the kind of place where Gothic stories happened. Impressive, isn't it? Sebastian's voice broke the silence for the first time in hours. There was a strange note in it, somewhere between pride and bitterness. My family has owned it since 1154. 26 generations of Thornhills have lived, loved, hated, and died between those stones. It is heritage. It is legacy. It is a prison. Genevieve finally looked at him. All inheritances are prisons, Your Grace. The question is whether the walls are made of stone or of expectations. Something flickered in his eyes. Genuine interest, perhaps, or the recognition of an equally trapped soul. The carriage passed through the main gate, under an iron portcullis that looked like the teeth of a giant beast. The inner courtyard was vast, paved with irregular stones worn by centuries of traffic. Servants appeared immediately, moving with the silent efficiency of a well-trained anthill. Sebastian disembarked first, then offered his hand to help her. Genevieve hesitated. Touching him felt like crossing some invisible line, but to refuse would be to show weakness. She placed her hand in his. Through her gloves she felt restrained strength, surprising warmth. His fingers closed firmly but not brutally around hers, steadying her as she stepped down. When her feet touched the stones, he did not let go immediately. For a suspended moment they remained connected. The cold wind whipped her hair, pulling strands from her severe bun. The rain had turned into a fine mist that blurred the world into a watercolor. "Welcome to Thornhill Castle, Miss Ashford," he said quietly. "May these be the most bearable 30 days possible for both of us." He released her hand. The cold immediately took its place. A middle-aged woman, dressed in immaculate black, approached. She had a stern face but kind eyes, and Genevieve felt some relief. She was not completely alone in hostile land. "Mrs. Harriet Winters," Sebastian introduced, "housekeeper of Thornhill for 20 years. My mother trusted her with her life. I trust her." "Miss Ashford," the housekeeper inclined her head respectfully. There was no judgment in her voice, only professionalism. "Your luggage will be taken to the Blue Room in the West Wing. I have prepared a hot bath and a light supper in your chambers. The Duke has requested you rest tonight. Tomorrow I will familiarize you with the castle." Genevieve felt unexpected gratitude. She would not have to face a formal dinner on this first night, exposed and vulnerable. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. Come, my dear." The housekeeper touched her elbow lightly, a maternal gesture that almost broke Genevieve's armor. "You are soaked and freezing. We must get you warm." As she was led through stone corridors lit by gas lamps, Genevieve felt the weight of the castle envelop her. The ceilings were absurdly high, decorated with dark oak beams. Portraits of Thornhill ancestors watched her from the walls, pale faces floating in the darkness of oil paint. Persian rugs muffled her steps, but the castle still echoed, as if talking to itself in a language of draughts and ancient creaks. The Blue Room justified its name. The walls were covered in sapphire blue damask wallpaper, and midnight blue velvet curtains framed tall windows. The four-poster bed was enormous, covered with a quilt embroidered in shades of blue and silver. A marble fireplace crackled cheerfully, chasing away the damp chill. It was the most luxurious room Genevieve had ever been in. "The late Duchess's clothes have not been touched," Mrs. Winters said softly, opening a massive wardrobe. "The Duke ordered them to be available should you need anything more formal. They are your size, I believe." Genevieve touched the fabric of an emerald green silk gown. It was exquisite. It also felt cursed. "I would prefer to wear my own dresses, Mrs. Winters, as simple as they may be." The housekeeper smiled approvingly. "A wise girl. Ghosts of the past have a peculiar smell, and this castle has too many already." After Mrs. Winters left, promising to return with supper, Genevieve finally allowed herself to crumble. She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her damp dress, and looked at her own hands. They were still steady. They were not trembling, but inside everything about her was trembling. A soft knock on the door. Before she could answer, a young maid entered carrying a bucket of hot water. She couldn't have been more than 16, her round face freckled. "I'm Mary, miss," the girl said shyly, pouring water into the copper tub behind the painted screen. "I'll help you with your bath and dressing." "I can manage on my own, Mary, but thank you." The girl hesitated, biting her lip. Then, as if the words could no longer be contained, she whispered hurriedly, "Other women have come here, miss. For the Duke. None of them left the same. He has something in him that breaks people. Be careful." Before Genevieve could respond, Mary ran out as if regretting her boldness. Genevieve stared at the closed door for a long time. Then slowly she began to remove her damp dress. Each button was a small act of surrender to the inevitable. The bath water was almost scalding, scented with lavender oil. Genevieve submerged herself up to her neck, allowing the heat to penetrate her chilled bones. For the first time in 4 years, since she had begun to carry the weight of Ashford Manor alone, she wept. But they were silent tears, because even in despair some women learn not to make a sound. Later, wearing a simple cotton nightgown, her hair loose and cascading down her back, she ate the supper Mrs. Winters had brought. Vegetable soup, fresh bread, mild cheese. It was better food than she had eaten in months at Ashford Manor. At midnight, unable to sleep, she approached the window. She pulled back the heavy curtain and looked out at the night landscape. The rain had stopped. Down below, lights flickered in the valley, tenant houses and distant villages. Beyond, only darkness. 30 nights, 29 now. A knock on the door startled. Genevieve clutched the nightgown to her body, her heart racing. "Miss Ashford," Sebastian's voice through the thick wood. "Are you awake?" "Yes." Her voice came out more strangled than she intended. "You don't need to open it. I just came to ensure you are comfortable. Mrs. Winters reports you refused Isadora's clothes." Genevieve approached the door, placing her palm against the cold wood. On the other side, she imagined him doing the same. "I cannot wear a ghost's dresses, Your Grace." Silence. "Then Isadora is no ghost. She is far too dead to haunt anything. But I understand the sentiment. I will send for a modiste from York. You will have appropriate clothing." "It's not necessary, Miss Ashford." His voice had hardened. "I will allow you to maintain your dignity in every way possible, but while you are under my roof, I will not allow you to look indigent. It is a matter of a host's pride, not charity. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good night, then." The sound of boots walking away down the corridor. Genevieve pressed her forehead against the door and allowed herself a bitter smile. Prisoner or guest? Commodity or person? The lines were blurring in ways she couldn't comprehend. She finally lay down, enveloped in linen sheets that smelled of lavender and something older. The castle cracked and murmured around her, settling in for the night. Before she fell asleep, a singular thought crystallized in her mind. Sebastian Alaric Thornhill was not what she expected. There were layers to him, poorly healed wounds, a loneliness that mirrored her own. And that, Genevieve understood with a shiver of premonition, was far more dangerous than simple cruelty. The first week at Thornhill Castle passed in a strangely domestic routine. Genevieve would wake at 7, when Mary knocked softly on the door with tea and biscuits. She dressed alone, refusing help, except for the buttons on her back she couldn't reach. She took breakfast in her room, watching the morning break over the cliffs through her window. Sebastian kept a polite distance. He did not demand her presence except at dinner, served punctually at 8 o'clock in the smaller dining room. They were silently tense encounters, punctuated by minimal conversation about the weather, estate management, or parliamentary politics he followed in the London papers. Genevieve responded when questioned, but did not initiate dialogue. It was a fine line they both respected, fulfillment of a contract without any pretense of normality, but the loneliness was suffocating. During the day, she wandered the permitted corridors of the West Wing, exploring vast, empty salons that echoed her footsteps as a constant reminder of her isolation. Mrs. Winters had shown her the areas she could frequent: the ladies' sitting room, the music room, the conservatory, the sewing room, and the library. The library. On the 5th day, Mrs. Winters led her to the double oak doors on the 2nd floor of the West Wing. She opened them with reverence, revealing what Genevieve immediately knew was a sanctuary. The Thornhill Library spanned 2 floors, connected by a spiral staircase of wrought iron that seemed to grow from the floor like a metal plant. Walnut shelves rose to the vaulted ceiling, crammed with thousands of leather-bound volumes. Afternoon light poured through high-stained glass windows, painting the wooden floor with colorful constellations. It smelled of old paper, leather, beeswax, and something indefinable that all true libraries possess, the scent of accumulated knowledge, of generations conversing through yellowed pages. "The Duke said you may use it freely," Mrs. Winters informed her. "It is a collection spanning 3 centuries. You only need to return the volumes to their correct places." When the housekeeper left, Genevieve remained motionless in the center of the room, slowly turning, absorbing the magnitude. For the first time since leaving Ashford Manor, she felt something beyond resignation. She felt curiosity, wonder, hope. She approached the shelves with the reverence of a pilgrim reaching a sacred temple. Her fingers slid across the spines. Shakespeare and Marlowe, Milton and Donne, the Brontes, Jane Austen, scientific treatises by Darwin, philosophy by Locke and Hume, poetry by Keats and Byron. And in the section near the east window, she found something that made her heart leap, a collection of botany books magnificently illustrated. She pulled out a large volume bound in moss-green leather. She opened it carefully. The pages were populated by hand-painted flowers in watercolor, impossibly detailed roses, lilies captured in a perfect moment of bloom, wildflowers rendered with scientific love. Each illustration was accompanied by notes in delicate feminine script, describing medicinal properties, blooming periods, soil preferences. In the bottom right corner of the first illustration, a signature, ICT Isadora Catherine Thornhill, the Duke's dead wife, the ghost who inhabited the forbidden East Wing, the woman whose dresses Genevieve had refused to wear. Here she was, immortalized not in oil portraits but in delicate watercolor brushstrokes. Genevieve studied each page with growing fascination. There was genuine talent here, a scientific eye combined with artistic sensitivity. Whoever Isadora Thornhill was, she had been more than a decorative wife. She painted when she wanted to escape me. Genevieve startled violently. The book nearly fell from her hands. She spun to find Sebastian leaning against the doorframe, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Forgive me, Your Grace, I didn't hear you enter." The castle teaches one to move silently, useful when one prefers to avoid people. He entered, hands in his pockets, approaching slowly, as if afraid of scaring her. "You found Isadora's books. They are extraordinary." Genevieve held the volume against her chest. She had remarkable talent. "These watercolors are museum quality." Something softened in his face. Yes, she did. It was one of the few truths about her. The rest, he broke off, looking out the window at the gardens below. The rest was a skillfully constructed lie. But the paintings never lied. A delicate silence settled between them. Genevieve felt she was on fragile ground, where the wrong words could create irreparable fissures. "I also paint," she said softly. "Watercolor, mostly flowers from the garden at Ashford Manor. Not with this level of skill, but..." "Show me." "I didn't bring my sketchbooks." "Then paint something new. There are art supplies in the sewing room. Mrs. Winters will find them." He finally looked at her, and Genevieve saw an unexpected vulnerability in those grey eyes. "I would like to see the world through your eyes, Miss Ashford, if you'll allow me." It wasn't an order. It was a request. And requests were infinitely more dangerous than commands, because they required a choice. "Yes," Genevieve heard herself say, "I can do that." In the following days, a new routine was established. Genevieve spent mornings in the library, reading voraciously. Afternoons were in the sewing room, where abundant light allowed her to paint. Sebastian didn't bother her during these hours, but occasionally she would find him watching from a distance, a silent presence on the margins of her consciousness. She painted what she saw from the window, the wild gardens of Thornhill, abandoned and growing chaotically beyond the formal walls. There was beauty in that disorder, a melancholy in roses that bloomed without witnesses. A week after her arrival, Sebastian appeared while she was painting. He sat in the opposite chair, just watching. Genevieve forced herself to continue, though she felt the weight of his gaze like physical pressure. "Why abandoned gardens?" he asked finally. "Because they are honest." Genevieve didn't lift her eyes from the watercolor. "Formal gardens lie. They pretend order, control, the domestication of nature. But abandoned gardens reveal the truth, that nothing is permanent, that beauty exists even without maintenance, that growth happens with or without human approval. A pessimistic philosophy, realistic." Now she faced him. "Your Grace knows a great deal about carefully maintained lies, doesn't he?" He stiffened. For a moment, Genevieve thought she had gone too far. Then, surprisingly, Sebastian laughed. It was a harsh sound, rusted from disuse but genuine. "Mrs. Winters was right about you." "What did she say?" "That you possess a spine of steel beneath that delicate appearance. That you will survive Thornhill when others stronger have crumbled. Survival is a talent women learn early, Your Grace, especially when we are turned into bargaining chips." His smile faded. "Touché, Miss Ashford." He stood moved to the window. Genevieve returned to her painting, but she was hyper-aware of his presence just a few feet away. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people accustomed to solitude, recognizing it in one another. "Isadora painted these gardens too," Sebastian said at last, his voice low. "Before my mother died, they were magnificent. Lady Catherine Thornhill dedicated herself to them, with a passion she never showed for me. When she passed, I ordered them to be left untouched. I thought Isadora would appreciate it, but she hated them, said they were a morbid reminder. And what do you think now?" He looked at her over his shoulder. "That perhaps they were too honest. They reflected our marriage too clearly. Abandoned, slowly dying, still beautiful, but in a tragic way." Genevieve put down her brush. "So, Your Grace," "Sebastian." His voice was almost inaudible. "When we are alone, you may call me Sebastian. The title weighs too much here. It was an intimacy they had no right to. It was crossing a line they both knew shouldn't be crossed." But Genevieve found herself nodding. "Only if you call me Genevieve." He turned completely, studying her with an intensity that made heat rise in her neck. "Genevieve," he tested the name. "It means woman of the race, appropriate. And Sebastian means venerated, ironic?" A bitter smile touched his lips. Devastatingly. He left moments later, leaving Genevieve alone with her unfinished watercolor and a heart beating faster than it should. That night, during a tense dinner in the smaller dining room, Sebastian informed her, "I leave for London tomorrow. Business in Parliament. I will be gone for 3 days." Genevieve felt something strange in her chest. Not relief, as she had expected, but something close to disappointment. "I understand. Mrs. Winters will look after you. The castle is yours to explore, except—" He hesitated. "The east wing remains forbidden. Those are Isadora's private rooms, preserved as they were. There is nothing there you need to see. I wasn't planning on exploring forbidden rooms, Your Grace." But when he left the next morning, his carriage disappearing around the curves of the cliff road, Genevieve stood at the window of the blue room, watching until it became a distant speck, and she realized with growing unease that Thornhill Castle seemed much emptier, without the Iron Duke inhabiting its corridors. Sebastian returned on the afternoon of the 4th day, earlier than planned. Genevieve was in the library, lost in a volume on Victorian gardening, when she heard movement in the hallway. She looked up just in time to see him pass the library door, hair disheveled from the journey, greatcoat spattered with rainwater. "Your Grace, you weren't expected." "Until tomorrow." Matters in Parliament resolved more quickly. He stopped, studying her. "Did you miss me?" It was a provocation, but there was also a genuine vulnerability underlying it. Genevieve chose a dangerous honesty. "The castle was very quiet." Something shone in his eyes. Satisfaction, hope. "Dine with me tonight. In the main dining hall, not the small one. I'm tired of austere meals." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't an order either. It was somewhere in between, where Genevieve was beginning to realize most of their interactions resided. "At 8? 7. I'm famished and London's cuisine is deplorable." Genevieve spent the afternoon choosing a dress with absurd care. The modiste from York had sent several pieces, quickly made to measurements Mrs. Winters had provided. She chose one in deep emerald green satin, simple but elegant, with a modest neckline and long sleeves. Mary helped her with her hair, pinning it in a low chignon, a few curls framing her face. When she came down at 7, Sebastian was already waiting in the salon adjacent to the dining hall, dressed in black formal wear. He turned as she entered, and Genevieve saw masculine appreciation dawn clearly in his eyes. "Green suits you," he said. "It matches the determination in your eyes. Flattery was not part of the contract, Your Grace." "It's not flattery. It's a factual observation." The dinner was elaborate. French onion soup, roasted lamb with mint, garlic potatoes, glazed vegetables, followed by plum pudding. They talked more than at any previous meal. About London, political changes under Disraeli, new Labour reform bills Sebastian supported in the House of Lords. Genevieve discovered he was surprisingly progressive for an aristocrat. He supported expanding labour rights, universal education, and even muttered cautious approval for the women's suffrage movement, though not publicly, as that would be social suicide. "Why do you care?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Most nobles defend the status quo. Change threatens privilege. Because I've seen how the system fails." He took a sip of wine, looking at the crimson light through the crystal. My tenants in Thornhill live in conditions no human should endure. Children dying of diseases that could be prevented with basic sanitation. Workers mutilated in accidents because mine owners cut safety costs. Privilege is an insult when it's built on the suffering of others. A dangerous philosophy for a duke. Yes, but so is fortune. And mine, he smiled bitterly. Mine comes from coal mining. Black gold extracted by men who will never see the sunlight. How can I enjoy this wealth without at least trying to better their lives? Genevieve felt something shift in her chest. Sebastian Alaric Thornhill was not just a cold-damaged enigma. He was a man with a conscience, battling a legacy he hadn't chosen. After dinner, he surprised her. "Come, I want to show you something." He led her through corridors she had not yet explored, down a stone staircase that seemed medieval. They arrived at a vast cellar, arched columns supporting a low ceiling, endless shelves filled with dusty bottles. "The Thornhill wine collection," Sebastian explained, picking up an ancient bottle. "Some of these Burgundies are from 1790. They survived the French Revolution, Napoleon wars, and regime changes, just waiting to be drunk." He opened the bottle with an elegant corkscrew, poured 2 generous glasses. "Brandy after dinner is custom," Genevieve observed. "Wine in the cellar is irregular." "I know," he toasted her. "But tonight demands irregularity." They drank. The wine was extraordinary, complex and velvety, a taste of liquid history. "Why did you bring me here?" Genevieve asked softly. Sebastian leaned against the stone wall, studying her in the dim light of the lantern he had brought. "Because in 3 days in London I realized something disturbing." "What?" "That Thornhill didn't feel like my home. It felt only like your absence." Genevieve's heart leaped. "Your Grace, and this afternoon, returning home in the storm." He took a long sip of wine. "There was an accident. One of my tenants, a young man with a family, had his barn destroyed by the wind. I went to help rescue the animals. We spent 3 hours in the torrential rain, saving terrified horses, cattle." Genevieve noticed then that his clothes, though changed, still had mud stains in the creases. There was a fresh cut on his forehead, partially hidden by his hair. "You're injured. A scratch, insignificant." He waved it away. "The point is, while I was working, soaked and exhausted, I realized it was the most alive I had felt in 4 years, since Isadora died. Perhaps since before then. Purpose is powerful," Genevieve said softly. "More than wealth or title." "Yes." He looked at her intently. "And you, Genevieve. You've made me question the purposes I abandoned. You've made me want to fix things I let break." She should have retreated. She should have reminded him of the contract, the transaction, the 23 nights that still remained. But the wine, the atmosphere of the cellar, his raw honesty, it all conspired against rationality. "Sebastian." It was the first time she had used his name aloud. It sounded far too intimate. "What happened to Isadora?" He stiffened. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, as if a dam had finally broken, the words began to pour out. "Isadora was beautiful, the daughter of a minor earl, presented during the social season. I was 28, having just inherited the title after my father's death. She was a brilliant novelty. I was a desirable bachelor duke. It seemed inevitable." He poured more wine for them both. "I married her believing it was love. Perhaps it was for me. But for her," he laughed bitterly, "for her it was just a title and a fortune. I discovered that 3 months after the wedding, when I found her in the gardens with my best friend and lawyer, Thomas Blackwell. They weren't just talking, Genevieve." Genevieve felt a pang of pain for him, sharp as a glass shard. "I confronted them." Thomas fled like a coward. "Isadora laughed at me, said she had never loved me, that marriage was a transaction where she offered beauty and I a title. Why should she honor vows when I had already obtained what I desired? She was wrong." "Was she?" He stared at her. "Isn't that exactly what we are doing now? A transaction where you offer company and I offer protection from your father's prison? It's different. I don't pretend to have feelings I don't. I don't lie about the nature of the agreement." "No, you don't lie." He moved closer to her, and Genevieve found herself cornered between him and the stone wall. "And perhaps that's what destroys me, your brutal honesty. Your refusal to pretend this is anything other than what it is." "What do you want me to pretend, Sebastian?" "I don't know." His voice was hoarse. "I only know that when I look at you, I don't see a transaction. I see a person who understands that cages are built as much by expectations as by iron bars. And that terrifies me." They were very close now. Genevieve could feel his heat, see every detail of his angular face, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the unfathomable depth in his grey eyes. "Finish the story," she whispered. "What happened to Isadora?" He pulled back, running a hand through his hair. After I discovered her with Thomas, I became distant, cold, cordial but not intimate. She hated that. She preferred confrontation, drama. Polite coldness was a worse insult. She began to provoke me, bringing lovers more openly. Thomas fled to America, a coward to the end. Other men replaced him. He turned to face her again. 4 years ago there was a ball here. The whole of Yorkshire society was present. Isadora was radiant, wearing a tiara my grandmother had worn at Queen Victoria's coronation. She danced with everyone except me. At midnight, she went up to her chambers. I followed her. We had an argument. In the east wing at the top of the main staircase. His voice broke. She laughed at me, said she was pregnant. She didn't know by whom, didn't care, but she would force me to recognize the child as mine. To perpetuate the lie, I said terrible things. Things I never should have said. She moved to slap me. I stepped back. She lost her balance at the top of the stairs. Genevieve held her breath. She fell, tumbled down 20 marble steps. Broke her neck. Died instantly. Sebastian's eyes were wet. I didn't touch her, Genevieve. I swear I didn't, but I also didn't reach out fast enough to catch her. I hesitated. For a second, just 1 second, I thought it would be better this way. And then she was falling, and it was too late. A tear ran down his face. Genevieve, without thinking, reached out and gently wiped it away with her thumb. Sometimes, Sebastian, inaction is just human. It doesn't make you a murderer. It makes you an exhausted man who hesitated at the worst possible moment. The law agreed. The inquest ruled it an accident. But society, he laughed humorlessly. Society loves suspicion. I became the Iron Duke, cold enough to push his wife down the stairs. Is that why you keep the East Wing closed? A shrine to your guilt? It's a memorial to my failure. As a husband, as a man, as a protector, I promised before God and society to protect her. And I failed. Genevieve took his hand between hers. Sebastian, listen to me. Isadora made choices. You made choices. Both people in that marriage were adults responsible for their actions. Her death was a tragedy, but it was not your murder. Carrying this guilt doesn't bring her back. It only destroys you. He looked at their clasped hands. Why are you, of all people, comforting me? You should hate me. I bought 30 nights of your life. You didn't buy me. My father sold me. There is a huge difference, she squeezed his hands. And as for why I comfort you, perhaps because I recognize pain when I see it, and because loneliness recognizes loneliness. Sebastian pulled her to him abruptly, hugging her with a force that bordered on desperation. Genevieve froze for an instant, then slowly wrapped her arms around him, allowing herself to offer the comfort they both needed. They stayed that way for a time impossible to measure, two castaways clinging to one another in a storm only they could feel. When they finally separated, Sebastian quickly wiped his eyes. Forgive me. That was inappropriate. It was human. Genevieve smiled softly. And sometimes, human is exactly what we need to be. He escorted her back to the blue room in a silence that was different from the previous ones. It wasn't discomfort, but mutual understanding. At the threshold, before bidding her good night, Sebastian took her hand and kissed it gently. Thank you, Genevieve, for listening, for not judging me. We all carry ghosts, Sebastian. Yours just have names. When the door closed between them, Genevieve leaned against it, her heart pounding. Something had changed in that cellar. Among the ancient wines and confessions, a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. And for the first time, Genevieve allowed herself to consider a terrifying possibility. What if the 30 days were not just servitude to be endured, but something far more dangerous? What if she was beginning to care for the Iron Duke? Outside, the storm finally arrived. Rain lashed the windows of Thornhill Castle as thunder echoed through the valleys like the laughter of ancient gods. Watching the human tragedy unfold continues in the next part of the document. The following days brought an early spring to Yorkshire, as if nature had decided to offer a temporary truce to the approaching winter. Genevieve woke to a golden morning, sunlight flooding the blue room through the curtains she had forgotten to close completely the night before. There was something different in the air, not just the milder temperature, but a lightness she hadn't felt since when? Since before her father made that damned bet. Since before her mother died? Perhaps since distant childhood, when responsibilities didn't yet weigh on her shoulders like invisible chains. She dressed in one of the simpler dresses the modiste had sent, a cream-colored cotton, with details in green embroidery. She didn't expect to see anyone. Sebastian had mentioned at breakfast the day before that he would be busy with estate matters during the week, but instead of going to the library or the sewing room, Genevieve felt drawn outside. She went down the corridors until she found a side door that led to the gardens at the back of the castle. The formal gardens, closest to the main building, were maintained by two elderly gardeners Genevieve occasionally saw working. Geometrically trimmed bushes, beds of tulips in military formation, fountains with marble cherubs pouring water into perfectly symmetrical basins. But beyond the low stone walls that marked this domesticated area, there was something wilder. Genevieve passed through the wrought iron gate, half hidden under wisteria vines still without flowers. On the other side, she discovered what had once been an elaborate garden, but was now territory reclaimed by nature. Gravel paths disappeared under carpets of moss and weeds. Once organized beds now exploded in a chaotic profusion of wild roses, overgrown lavender, and sage that spread without control. Ancient fruit trees never pruned extended gnarled branches in random directions. A pergola covered in ivy was slowly collapsing, surrendering to time. It was chaos. It was abandonment. It was the most beautiful thing Genevieve had seen in years. She walked slowly along the almost invisible paths, touching flowers that no one had admired for years. The roses were small and perfect, ancient varieties that had survived through sheer genetic tenacity. There was wild thyme releasing its scent under her feet. Bees worked methodically, indifferent to the absence of human gardeners. In the center, she discovered a stone bench under a weeping willow. She sat, closing her eyes, allowing the sounds and scents to envelop her. Birds sang in the branches above. The wind whispered through the leaves. In the distance, the constant rush of a river running in the valley below the cliff. Peace. When was the last time she had felt genuine peace? My mother cultivated these gardens. Genevieve opened her eyes, startled. Sebastian was standing at the entrance to the pergola, hands in his pockets, watching her with a soft expression she had never seen before. "I thought you would be busy until late," she said, her heart speeding up. "My duties could wait. I saw you cross the gate from the office window and—" He shrugged. Curiosity won out over duty. He approached the bench. Genevieve moved to make room and he sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Lady Catherine Thornhill," Sebastian continued, looking around, "dedicated 6 hours daily to these gardens. She knew the botanical name of every plant. She used to say that gardens were the only art form where we could work in partnership with God. Was she religious? To us, not particularly, but she had a deep faith in the natural order of things. She believed plants taught truths that humans had forgotten: patience, cycles of death and rebirth, the beauty of impermanence." Genevieve gently touched a nearby rose. "She sounds like she was an extraordinary woman." She was. She was also distant, cold actually. She loved her gardens more than she loved my father or me. There was no bitterness in his voice, just factual observation. And when she died of pneumonia when I was 14, I ordered the gardens to be preserved as a memorial, but maintenance would also require love. And you didn't love something that she loved more than you." He looked at her, surprised. "How do you know that?" "Because I recognize the feeling. My mother loved Ashford Manor. The house, the history, the tradition. She loved it more than she loved my father, certainly. Perhaps more than she loved me, too. When she died, the manor became her true memorial. Everything I did afterward was to try and keep her alive through those stones. And did it work? No, it only exhausted me. I learned too late that we cannot keep the dead alive. They leave and we are left with a choice. Allow them to drag us down with them or move forward carrying only the good memories." Sebastian slowly reached out his hand, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, his fingers intertwined with hers. "These gardens should have been cared for," he said softly. "Not as a memorial, but because they are beautiful and deserve love regardless of who planted them. I made a mistake letting them die. They aren't dead." Genevieve squeezed his hand. "Just wild, and perhaps that's better. Wild gardens have a freedom that domesticated ones will never know." They sat in silence for a long time, hands intertwined, watching the bees work on the ancient roses. There was something deeply intimate in that shared silence, more intimate perhaps than words could express. Finally, Sebastian spoke again. "Could you restore them?" "The gardens?" "Yes, not to control them completely, but to guide them. Remove what is truly dead, nurture what still lives. Make them something between order and chaos." Genevieve turned to face him. "Why?" "Because when I see you paint, there is a life in your eyes that doesn't exist at other times. And because," and he hesitated, a rare vulnerability on that usually controlled face, "because I would like to create something beautiful again. And I can't do it alone." It was a request. It was an invitation. It was something more dangerous than both. It was a partnership. Genevieve should have refused. She should have reminded him that she only had 20 days left before she had to leave. But looking around at that wild garden, at the possibilities hidden under years of neglect, she found herself saying, "Yes, I'll help." The smile that lit up his face was transformative. For a moment, Genevieve saw the man he could have been without the bitterness, without the betrayal, without the guilt. She saw the beauty that the pain concealed, and when he lifted her intertwined hand and kissed her knuckles softly, Genevieve felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. It was more than gratitude, more than respect. It was the beginning of a feeling that had no safe name. The following days passed in a new and strange routine. Genevieve woke early, dressed in simple clothes suitable for garden work, and met Sebastian already waiting at the wrought iron gate at 8 in the morning. They worked side by side for hours. Sebastian, who had initially protested that he knew nothing about gardening, proved to be a quick student and a tireless worker. They removed aggressive weeds, pruned dead branches, rediscovered gravel paths under years of accumulated leaves. Genevieve discovered there was a shared language in physical labor. They didn't need to talk constantly. A look, a gesture, and they understood each other. He held a branch while she cut it. She pointed to a plant that needed relocating, and he dug the earth to transplant it. Mrs. Winters sent picnic baskets at noon, which they ate sitting on the stone bench under the willow. They talked about everything and nothing. Books they'd read, places they'd visited, philosophies on life they had developed through painful experiences. Genevieve learned that Sebastian loved astronomy, but suffered from chronic insomnia, spending nights studying constellations from the North Tower. That he preferred Italian, Renaissance art to everything that came after. That he had an irrational fear of enclosed spaces, ever since he got trapped in a cellar as a child for 3 hours. He learned that Genevieve spoke fluent Italian, taught by her mother who had spent her youth in Florence. That she dreamed of traveling to Japan, fascinated by oriental watercolors she had seen in books. That she had a near-photographic memory for poetry, able to recite Keats and Shelley for hours. Knowledge accumulated between them like layers of sediment, building a foundation of understanding that no contract could create. On the 16th day of her stay, the inevitable happened. They were working on the crumbling pergola, trying to reinforce it with new wood before it collapsed completely. Genevieve was at the top of a stepladder, tying a new vine to the top of the structure. Sebastian held the base of the ladder. "A little more to the left," he instructed. "You need to reach that notch." Genevieve stretched, her fingers grazing the rough wood. Almost. The ladder wobbled. Genevieve lost her balance with a small cry. She fell backward. Strong arms caught her. Sebastian had moved with surprising speed, letting the ladder fall so he could catch her. They tumbled onto the soft grass together, he cushioning her fall. For a suspended moment they lay tangled. Genevieve's heart hammered, not just from the fright. Sebastian's face was inches from hers. She could see every detail. Dark lashes against pale skin, the visible pulse at the base of his throat, the intensity in the grey eyes watching her. "Are you hurt?" His voice was hoarse. "No, you broke my fall." But neither moved. The air between them seemed electrified, charged with something dangerous and unavoidable. Sebastian's hand still held her, one on her back, the other at her waist. Even through the layers of clothing, Genevieve felt his warmth, his restrained strength. "Genevieve!" He whispered her name like a prayer or a curse, impossible to tell. "Yes?" "I should let you go." "You should, but I don't want to." "I know." It was she who moved first, lifting a hand to touch his face. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, feeling the roughness of stubble, the firmness of bone beneath the skin. He closed his eyes at her touch as if it caused him pain. When he opened them again, there was decision in them. "This is madness," he said. "Yes, you are here by contract." "I shouldn't." "You shouldn't, but you are." He pulled her closer, eliminating the space that still separated them. Genevieve felt the world narrow, until nothing existed except the two of them, tangled on the grass of a forgotten garden, while the sun filtered through the willow leaves in golden patterns on their skin. "If I kiss you," Sebastian murmured against her lips, "there will be no turning back. I won't be able to pretend you are just a contractual obligation." "Then don't pretend." He kissed her. It was not soft or hesitant. It was hunger restrained for too long, desire denied until denial became impossible. His mouth captured hers with an urgency that stole Genevieve's breath, and she responded with equal intensity, her fingers twining in his hair, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened. Sebastian rolled, placing her beneath him, shielding her body with his. His hands roamed her waist, her back, losing themselves in the hair that had escaped its bun. Genevieve arched against him, feeling every muscle, every contour through layers of clothing that suddenly seemed like intolerable obstacles. When they finally broke apart to breathe, both were trembling. God, Sebastian gasped against her throat. What are you doing to me? The same thing you are doing to me. Genevieve held his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. This is real, Sebastian. It doesn't matter how it started. It's real now. He pulled away abruptly, rolling to his side, sitting up with his head in his hands. It can't be real. You're here because your father threw you down like a wager. This is exploitation. Abuse of power. I promised not to do this. Genevieve sat up too, adjusting her disheveled clothing. You promised not to buy me for your bed. And you didn't. This, she touched his still tingling lips softly. This was not bought. It was freely given. There is nothing free when one person has power and the other has no choice. I always have a choice. Her voice hardened. I survived 4 years keeping Ashford Manor running, while my father destroyed everything he touched. I endured being sold as a commodity. I am not a helpless victim, Sebastian. I am a woman making choices, and I choose this. He stared at her, something close to desperation in his eyes. And when the 30 days are over? When you leave and I am here alone again? How will I... Don't think about the 30 days. Think about now. Just now. But Sebastian stood up, moving away. He ran his hands through his hair, his back tense. I can't. I've already failed one wife. I will not fail you, too. You deserve more than this. You deserve a real choice, not one influenced by circumstance. Sebastian, please. He didn't turn around. Go inside. I need to think. Genevieve stood slowly, brushing grass from her skirt. She wanted to argue, wanted to force him to see that what was between them was stronger than contracts or guilt. But she saw the rigidity in his shoulders and understood. He was terrified. Not of her, of himself, of repeating the mistakes of the past. All right, she said softly. But Sebastian, what happened with Isadora won't happen with me. I am not her. And you are not the man you were 4 years ago. She left him alone in the garden, among the wild roses and unrealized possibilities. When she reached the blue room, she collapsed onto the bed, touching the lips that still held the memory of his kiss. 14 days remaining, 14 days until it all ended. And for the first time since arriving at Thornhill Castle, Genevieve Marguerite Ashford found herself wishing that time would stop, that the impossible were possible, that contracts could be broken not by their end, but by their transformation. But wishing, as she had learned far too early, rarely made anything real. Due to character limits, I will conclude the narrative, maintaining quality and reaching the total 60-65K character target. 3 days passed in tense silence. Sebastian sent his apologies for dinner through Mrs. Winters. Urgent business, accumulated correspondence, a meeting with the steward. Genevieve knew they were polite lies. He was avoiding her. The garden remained untouched. The ladder still lay on the grass where it had fallen. Genevieve buried herself in the library, losing herself in volumes that transported her anywhere but here. But even Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters couldn't distract her completely. Her thoughts returned obsessively to that kiss, to the feeling of his arms, to the way he had looked at her as if she were both salvation and damnation. On the night of the 19th day, when she had already resigned herself to the remaining 11 days passing in mutual exile, a soft knock echoed on her door. Genevieve opened it. Sebastian stood there, dressed formally in black, his expression carefully neutral. Good evening, Miss Ashford. I apologize for my absence these past few days. The return to formalities cut like a knife. Miss Ashford, no longer Genevieve. Your Grace? She kept her voice equally formal, though it hurt. I would like you to accompany me to the music room after dinner. I have a request to make. It wasn't an invitation, but it wasn't an order either. It was somewhere in between, where all their interactions seemed to reside. At 8. Yes, thank you. Dinner was torture. They ate in almost complete silence, only the sounds of silver against porcelain filling the void between them. Genevieve barely touched her food, her stomach too tight to accommodate nourishment. When they finished, Sebastian rose, formally offering his arm. Shall we? The music room was on the 2nd floor, not far from the library. Genevieve had only been there once briefly. It was a spacious room with walls covered in light wood paneling, tall windows with burgundy velvet curtains. A Steinway grand piano dominated the center, its polished ebony surface reflecting the light from the chandeliers. Sebastian led her to the piano, then stood, hands in his pockets, clearly nervous. My mother used to play, he said abruptly. It was one of the few things we shared. I would sit here. He touched a small bench beside the piano, and she would play Chopin mostly. She said Chopin understood that beauty and sorrow were inseparable. Why did you bring me here, Sebastian? He finally looked at her. Because for the last 3 days I've realized something. I can distance myself from you physically. I can avoid meals, avoid the gardens, avoid any situation where we might be alone. But I cannot distance you from my mind. And that terrifies me more than any physical proximity ever could. Genevieve felt her heart quicken. So I thought, music is safe. It's communication without dangerous words, without touches that cross lines. You said you played the piano. Would you play for me? It was naked vulnerability. It was surrender disguised as a request. Genevieve approached the piano, sitting on the cushioned bench. Her fingers rested on the ivory keys, cool and smooth. She hadn't played in weeks, not since leaving Ashford Manor. What would you like to hear? Whatever your heart chooses. She closed her eyes, allowing muscle memory to guide her fingers. She began to play Chopin's Nocturne Op. 9 No. 2, the piece Lady Catherine Thornhill had loved. The music flowed, melancholy and beautiful, filling the room with an emotion that words could not express. Genevieve lost herself in the notes, forgetting where she was, who she was, why she was there. There was only music, only pure communication between soul and art. She didn't notice Sebastian approach until she felt his presence directly behind her. But she didn't stop playing. She continued, letting every note carry everything she couldn't say: fear, desire, hope, hopelessness. When his fingers touched her shoulders lightly, she almost thought she'd imagined it. But then they trailed slowly down her arms, light as butterfly wings, following the movement of her hands on the keys. The music wavered but did not cease. Genevieve kept playing as Sebastian leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. Why do I feel like the prisoner when you are the one who is trapped? He whispered the words against her hair. Genevieve played the final chord, letting it reverberate in the silence. Then slowly she turned on the bench, swiveling to face him. Their faces were inches apart. She could see the conflict in his eyes, a war between duty and desire, between past and future. Sebastian, she said softly, 3 days without you were more of a prison than any contract could ever be. He touched her face with reverence, as if she were a precious artifact that might break with too much pressure. This is madness. You've said that already. It's still true. It also still doesn't matter. This time, when they kissed, it was different. There was no desperate urgency from the garden. There was deliberation, a conscious choice to cross a threshold they both knew had no return. The kiss deepened gradually, exploring rather than consuming. Sebastian's hands twined in her hair, undoing the carefully pinned chignon, letting brown curls fall over her shoulders. Genevieve held his face, her thumbs stroking his cheekbones, feeling the muscles contract beneath the skin. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. 10 days, he said hoarsely. There are only 10 days left. And then you leave. You go back to your life. I stay here. Then we have 10 days. Genevieve held his hands tightly. 10 days where we can choose to be honest about what this is. And what is it, Genevieve? She met his eyes. I don't know yet, but I know it's real, that it's important, and that when I leave, her voice failed. When I leave, I will carry you with me, no matter what happens after. He pulled her into a tight hug, burying his face in her hair. They stood that way for a long time, two hearts beating in an unlikely syncopation, two souls finding temporary solace in one another. Stay with me tonight, Sebastian murmured. Not like that, just stay. I don't want to be alone. It was a request too vulnerable to refuse. Genevieve nodded. He led her by the hand through silent corridors to his chambers in the West Wing, masculine rooms decorated in shades of navy blue and charcoal grey. He lit the fire, then retrieved 2 heavy blankets. They sat on the sofa before the fire, she leaning against him, head on his shoulder, his arms around her. They talked into the small hours about everything and nothing, dreams they'd had as children, fears they carried as adults, regrets that haunted them. Genevieve fell asleep just like that, protected and safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. When she woke to the pre-dawn light, Sebastian was still awake, watching her sleep with an expression that was half wonder, half torment. You didn't sleep? I can't waste a second of the time we have left. Genevieve touched his face softly. Then don't. And she kissed him again, choosing the present instead of mourning the inevitable future. Time became the enemy. Each dawn was a brutal reminder of dwindling days, of the deadline approaching. Genevieve and Sebastian existed in a fragile bubble, knowing it was temporary, but refusing to speak of the end. They worked in the gardens together during the day. At night, they dined in the smaller room, conversation flowing naturally about books, politics, philosophy. Afterward, they would invariably find themselves in the library or his chambers, just existing in each other's space. They did not cross certain physical lines. There were kisses, embraces, a deep emotional intimacy. but they both knew instinctively that to go further would be to make the parting impossible to bear. On the 25th day, with only 5 remaining, reality forced its way in the form of a sealed carriage that arrived unexpectedly in the early afternoon. Genevieve was in the library when Mrs. Winters appeared, her expression worried. "Miss Ashford, there is a visitor. The Duke requests you in the main salon immediately." "A visitor? Who?" But Mrs. Winters had already bustled away, hasty and evasive. Genevieve descended the staircase, apprehension growing in her chest. Feminine voices echoed from the salon, a crystal-clear laugh that sounded calculated to attract male attention. At the entrance, she stopped short. Sebastian stood by the fireplace, his expression carefully neutral. But it wasn't he who captured Genevieve's attention. It was the woman beside him, blonde, dazzlingly beautiful, dressed in a powder blue silk that cost more than Genevieve would earn in a year. Laughter still on her perfect carmine lips, light blue eyes studying Sebastian with a mixture of ownership and calculation. "Ah!" The woman turned as Genevieve entered, assessing her from head to toe in a single devastating glance. "This must be your temporary companion." The tone turned polite words into a veiled insult. Sebastian tensed. "Lady Rosalind Pemberton, allow me to introduce Miss Genevieve Ashford." "Genevieve, Lady Rosalind is the daughter of the Earl of Westmore." Lady Rosalind extended a gloved hand, a gesture that forced Genevieve to approach and submit to a closer inspection. When Genevieve obediently touched her hand, Lady Rosalind held it a second longer than necessary, assessing the calluses that had resulted from her work in the garden. "Charming," she said, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "Sebastian mentioned he had company, but he didn't specify the nature of the arrangement." "Miss Ashford is at Thornhill under my protection," Sebastian interrupted, his voice icy. "The details are private." "Naturally." Lady Rosalind released Genevieve's hand, turning back completely to Sebastian, as if Genevieve had ceased to exist. "My father sent a letter of introduction. I am passing through on my way to Edinburgh, and he suggested I stop to pay my respects. We were introduced during the season 2 years ago, weren't we?" "Briefly." "Ah, yes. At the Ashworth's ball. You danced a single waltz with me. I remember distinctly because it was just after—" She paused delicately, glancing meaningfully toward Genevieve. "Well, after your official period of mourning." The subtext was clear. She knew Isadora's story, and she was marking her territory, making it clear she had social connections that Genevieve did not. Dinner was exquisite torture. Lady Rosalind dominated the conversation with elaborate gossip about London society, dropping names Genevieve had never heard, places she had never visited. She spoke of the opera at Covent Garden, balls at Buckingham Palace, seasons in Paris and Rome. Every word was a subtle reminder that Genevieve did not belong in this world. She was not an equal. She was a temporary intruder. Sebastian remained polite but distant, answering when questioned but not encouraging conversation. Genevieve could see the tension in his shoulders, the discomfort in his eyes. But Lady Rosalind was relentless. Between the main course and dessert, she leaned forward, lightly touching Sebastian's hand. "Sebastian, my father has expressed an interest in discussing a possible alliance between our families. You know there has always been an understanding. Westmore and Thornhill share mutual interests, and a union would be advantageous for both." Genevieve felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. She forced herself to keep her face neutral, her hands steady on her silver. Sebastian gently withdrew his hand. "Lady Rosalind, I appreciate your father's consideration, but I am not currently contemplating matrimony." "Not yet," she smiled understandingly. "Or are you not ready to take on public obligations while maintaining private arrangements?" The insult was now unmistakable. Genevieve felt heat rise in her neck but refused to show it. "Lady Rosalind," Sebastian's voice cut like a blade, "Miss Ashford is not a subject of gossip for social entertainment. I suggest we change the topic." Genuine surprise flashed in Lady Rosalind's eyes. Clearly, she had not expected him to defend his temporary companion against a socially suitable match. "Naturally. Forgive me." But the look she shot Genevieve was pure poison. After the interminable dinner, Sebastian escorted Lady Rosalind to the salon, while servants prepared a guest room. Genevieve escaped to the garden, needing the cold air to calm her emotional storm. 5 days. Only 5 days remained, and then she would be leaving anyway. Why did Lady Rosalind's presence hurt so much? Because it showed her the reality she had been avoiding. Sebastian was a duke. He would eventually need to marry again, produce heirs, maintain the bloodline. And when he did, it would be with someone like Lady Rosalind. not with the daughter of a bankrupt noble who had been sold as a debt payment. "Genevieve," she turned. Sebastian was approaching quickly, his expression tormented. "I did not invite her. I did not know she was coming. Her father and mine had an informal agreement to consider a matrimonial alliance after my mourning ended, but I never confirmed any interest. You don't have to explain. I do, because I saw your expression during dinner, saw how she treated you." He gently held her arms. "Rosalind is everything I should want in a wife. Impeccable pedigree, connections, a substantial dowry of £30,000. But when I look at her, I see only what? I see Isadora, another beautiful, empty social transaction. Another woman who would see me only as a title and a fortune." He pulled Genevieve closer. "When I look at you, I see a person who challenges me, who speaks the truth, who doesn't pretend to be something she's not. How can I choose ease when I have experienced authenticity? Sebastian, I leave in 5 days. Lady Rosalind stays. It's inevitable that eventually—" "Don't say that." He pressed his forehead against hers. 5 days. Then we have 5 days. Don't ruin them with inevitabilities." They kissed there under the Yorkshire night sky, knowing it was wrong and impossible and doomed, but unable to resist. 3 days later, Lady Rosalind finally departed after a polite but cool farewell from Sebastian. Her final look at Genevieve carried a promise. "You are temporary. I am permanent." And Genevieve, alone in the blue room later, allowed herself to cry, because Lady Rosalind was right. Continuing the narrative, maintaining pace and quality, only 2 days remained. 48 hours until the contract expired, and Genevieve returned to, Ashford Manor was lost. Her father had likely squandered even the 50 guineas Sebastian had left. She had no home to return to. The night of the 28th day found Genevieve sleepless, wandering the silent corridors of Thornhill Castle. Sebastian was in York, dealing with urgent legal matters not due back until the following morning. Without his presence, the castle felt particularly oppressive. Shadows stretched into threatening shapes. The wind howled through crevices in the ancient stones, like the voices of ghosts. Genevieve found herself before the door that led to the east wing, the forbidden wing, Isadora's chambers. For 28 days she had obeyed this one inflexible rule, but now, with time running out, with an uncertain future, something drove her to cross this final threshold. She needed to understand. She needed to see the woman Sebastian had loved and lost, the one who still haunted him. The door was not locked. It swung open silently under the light pressure of her hand. The corridor beyond was identical to the others, but it felt colder. Moonlight filtered through narrow windows, painting everything in shades of silver and lead. Genevieve walked slowly, her heart pounding violently. She passed closed doors until she reached a set of double doors at the end of the hall. She pushed them open gently. Isadora's room was preserved like a macabre museum. A 4-poster bed with pale pink silk curtains, her vanity covered with perfume bottles, brushes with blonde hairs still caught in the bristles, an open wardrobe revealing magnificent gowns in jewel tones. It was the room of a woman who loved luxury, but there was no warmth, no true personality beyond expensive superficiality. Genevieve moved through the room like a ghost, touching the surfaces Isadora had touched. The perfume still smelled sweet, though 4 years had passed. There was something disturbing in preserving everything like this, as if Sebastian expected her to return, or as if he couldn't accept she was gone. On the opposite wall, a full-length portrait dominated the space. Isadora in all her splendor, hair golden as ripe wheat, light blue eyes, a ball gown of white satin that made her look like a fairy tale princess. Beautiful, undeniably, devastatingly beautiful. But the eyes in the portrait were cold. There was something calculating in that painted gaze, something even the most talented artist hadn't managed to completely disguise. Genevieve backed away from the portrait, feeling a chill run down her spine. She was about to leave when she noticed a small writing desk near the window. A half-open drawer revealed papers, letters. She knew she shouldn't. It was an invasion of privacy, a final violation of a sacred space. But her hands were already moving, pulling open the top drawer. Letters. Dozens of them. Some perfumed, others on masculine letterhead. Genevieve picked one at random, unfolding it in the moonlight. "My dearest Isadora, the days without you are endless. Does Sebastian suspect? Are you certain we can—" She stopped reading, her stomach churning. They were love letters. From Thomas Blackwell, Sebastian's best friend. Tangible proof of the betrayal. She kept looking, her hands trembling now. In the back of the drawer she found a small brown leather-bound notebook, a diary. She opened it to a random page, dated March 1873, just a few months before Isadora's death. Sebastian is so predictable. He believes everything I say. Today I feigned a headache to avoid dinner with those tedious tenants of his. He was worried naturally. Meanwhile, Thomas came in through the back. We have 3 hours before anyone notices. Sometimes I wonder if I should just run away with Thomas. But the title, the title. Lady Thornhill Duchess. That is worth any amount of marital boredom. Genevieve turned the pages with growing horror. Entry after entry, detailed manipulations, elaborate lies, multiple affairs. And in August 1873, I am pregnant. I have no idea whose child it is. Thomas, that cavalry officer in London, or possibly even Sebastian. Ironically, Sebastian was radiant when I told him. The fool actually believes it's his. Well, it will serve its purpose. An heir will secure my position. If it's a girl, I'll try again with whoever is most convenient. Tears streamed down Genevieve's face. Sebastian had suffered so much, carried so much guilt, and Isadora had been a manipulative monster, using her beauty as a weapon. What are you doing in here? Genevieve spun around violently. Sebastian was in the doorway, backlit by the light from the hall. He was supposed to be in York. Why was he back? His face was livid with fury. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, ripping the diary from her hands. I told you this wing was forbidden. His voice echoed off the stone walls, pure, visceral anger. You had no right! Sebastian, get out! He grabbed her arm, not gently, dragging her toward the door. Get out of this room now! Genevieve planted her feet. No, not until you listen. There is nothing I need to hear from you about Isadora. She was my wife, my failure, my burden to carry. She was pregnant with another man's child. Genevieve screamed back. She was planning to run away with Thomas. It's all in the diary, Sebastian. She never loved you, never. He stopped dragging her, his hand still gripping her arm painfully. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I didn't read every damned line of that diary after she died? Then why do you keep this shrine? Why preserve everything as it was? Because it is a memorial to my stupidity. His voice broke. Because every time I look at this room, I remember what I am. An idiot who couldn't see the poison dressed as beauty. A man so desperate for love he believed obvious lies. He released her abruptly, turning away, hands in his hair. Isadora destroyed me. Systematically, deliberately. And the part that kills me most isn't that she betrayed me. It's that a part of me was relieved when she fell. Relieved? What kind of monster feels relief at his wife's death? The kind who was emotionally abused for years. Genevieve approached him cautiously. Sebastian, you are not a monster. You are a survivor. And keeping this room, it's not a memorial. It's self-punishment. It's a prison you built for yourself. I deserved this prison. No, you didn't. She held his face, forcing him to look at her. Isadora made cruel choices. You made the choice to try and love her despite her cruelty. There is no shame in that. There is only humanity. Tears were streaming down his face now, years of pain finally finding release. I couldn't save her. I hesitated for 1 second, just 1 second. And in that second she fell. Not because of you. Because of accident and physics and bad luck. You didn't push her. You didn't kill her, Sebastian. Her voice grew firmer. It is time to forgive yourself. He collapsed, literally kneeling there in Isadora's room, sobbing like a child. Genevieve knelt with him, wrapping him in her arms, letting him finally cry all the tears he had held back for 4 years. They stayed that way for an immeasurable time, tangled on the floor of the forbidden room, while outside the moon followed its indifferent course across the night sky. When Sebastian could finally speak again, his voice was hoarse. I came back from York early because I couldn't bear to be away. The last full day before you leave. And I find you here, invading your prison. I know, but Sebastian, this isn't a shrine. It's a mausoleum. And you aren't dead. You are still alive. You can still choose a different future. He looked around the room, really looked, as if seeing it for the first time. I have to let her go, don't I? Yes. I don't know how. By starting small. One object at a time. One memory at a time. Genevieve stood, holding out her hand to help him up. And by having help, you don't have to do it alone. Sebastian allowed her to pull him up. They stood in the center of the room, deciding. Tomorrow, he said finally. Tomorrow we start emptying this wing. Donate the clothes. Remove the perfumes. Take the portrait to the attic. Turn this into something new. I don't know what yet. But something that isn't a shrine to pain. Tomorrow, Genevieve agreed. He pulled her into a tight hug. Thank you for breaking into my prison. Thank you for refusing to let me rot in it. It's what people who care do. They left the East Wing together, closing the door behind them. They didn't lock it. There was no longer a need. And that night, for the first time in 4 years, Sebastian Alaric Thornhill slept without nightmares of a wife falling down the stairs. The morning of the 29th day dawned clear and cold, the last before Genevieve's departure. The air had a crystalline quality, as if the world itself knew something was ending. Genevieve woke early, unable to sleep any longer. She dressed carefully in the emerald green dress she had worn to that dinner, what felt like a lifetime ago. She wanted to look beautiful. She didn't know why, she just knew it mattered. She found Sebastian already in the gardens, working furiously on the roses, as if physical activity could stave off the inevitable. He looked up as she approached, and something softened in his eyes. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." They worked side by side for hours, not talking much, just existing in each other's space. Every gesture had become precious, every moment stolen from the time that would separate them. At noon, Mrs. Winters brought a picnic basket. They ate under the weeping willow, on the stone bench where so much had happened. "I need to tell you something," Sebastian said at last, setting down a half-eaten sandwich. "Not about the past. About the future." Genevieve felt her heart quicken. "I'm listening." "While I was in York, I made arrangements. I've leased a townhouse in Bloomsbury, London. It's furnished, with credit established in your name at 3 banks. There is an annual income of £500, enough to live comfortably. And I've hired a Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, a respectable widow, as your companion." Genevieve was speechless. "Sebastian, you can't. That's too much. Not enough. I don't know which." He took her hands. "Genevieve, you cannot go back to Ashford Manor. There is nothing there but ruins, and a father who would sell you again if given the chance. And I can't let you go without knowing you'll be safe. This feels too much like you're buying my freedom. No, it's ensuring you have a choice. A real choice. Not one influenced by desperation or need." His eyes intensified. "Because I'm going to ask you something that needs to be your decision, not your obligation." "What?" He took a deep breath. "Stay. Not as a contract obligation, not as a purchased companion. As my courtship. Let me try to do this right. To know you outside of these circumstances. To build something based on mutual choice, not a transaction." Tears filled Genevieve's eyes. "Sebastian, I know it's madness. I know society will talk. The bankrupt noble's daughter being courted by the Iron Duke, who supposedly killed his last wife. It will be a scandal. But I cannot let you go without trying, without knowing if we could have been something real. We already are something real. Yes, but it was forged in impossible circumstances. I need to know if it survives the light of day. If what we feel here in this garden, in this castle, translates to the real world." Genevieve pondered carefully. Every fiber of her being screamed to say yes immediately, but there was wisdom in hesitation. "Do you see me as I really am?" she asked softly. "Or do you see me as a creature you've cultivated in this garden? A salvation you've projected onto me?" He didn't answer immediately, considering it honestly. "I don't know. And that is precisely the point. I need to find out. And you need to find out who you are outside of Thornhill, outside of the responsibility of Ashford Manor, outside of being a daughter or a possession. How long? As long as you need. Months, years, if necessary. There is no deadline, Genevieve. Only an open invitation." She looked around at the garden they had restored together, at the castle that had become both prison and refuge, at the man who had started as her jailer and become... What? Friend? Lover? Something nameless still? "Yes," she said finally, "but with conditions. Name them. First, I pay my own way. I accept the townhouse and the companion as necessary protection for a woman alone in London. But the annual income, half. The rest you invest in education for women. Start a school in Thornhill for the local girls." Sebastian smiled. "Done. Next condition?" "Second, you don't court me as if I'm fragile or need saving. You court me as an equal. Challenge my mind, don't just flatter my feelings. That I can do with pleasure. Third, if at any point one of us realizes this isn't working, that what we had here doesn't survive out there, we are honest. No games, no prolonging the agony." "Agreed." "But Genevieve," he pulled her closer, "I have a condition of my own." "Which is?" "That you allow me to love you, completely, deeply, without fear. I don't know if I'll be good at it. I don't know if my heart even remembers how. But I want to try." Genevieve touched his face, tracing the jawline she had memorized. "No one is good at love at first, Sebastian. It's a skill we learn by practicing, and by failing, and by trying again. Then we'll try together?" "We'll try." He kissed her there under the weeping willow as the sun filtered through the leaves in golden patterns. It was a kiss different from the ones before. It wasn't urgency or desperation. It was a promise. It was a beginning, not an end. When they parted, they were both smiling through tears. "Tomorrow you leave," Sebastian said. The carriage is prepared to take you to London at noon, but it's not goodbye. It's see you soon. See you soon, Genevieve repeated. Until you show up at my door in Bloomsbury with flowers and honourable intentions. I'll give you 1 week to settle in. Then prepare to be courted as you've never been before. They spent the rest of the day together, memorizing every detail, the sound of each other's laughter, the feel of intertwined hands, the way the golden afternoon light painted everything in nostalgic hues. At dusk, Sebastian asked her to accompany him to one last place. He led her to the North Tower, up a narrow spiral staircase until they reached an observatory at the top. A massive telescope pointed at the sky through an opening in the retractable roof. I spend my nights here when I can't sleep, he explained. The stars. They remind you how small we are, how insignificant our problems are on a cosmic scale. Genevieve looked through the telescope. The night sky exploded into view, thousands of stars impossible to see with the naked eye. I see the opposite, she said softly. I see that we are made of the same material as the stars, that we are part of something greater, that the connections we make, the love we feel, is just as real and important as the gravity that holds planets in orbit. Sebastian wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on the top of her head. How do you manage to make everything more hopeful? It's not hope, it's choice. I choose to see the beauty instead of the void. I choose to believe it's worth trying. They stayed that way until the small hours, watching the sky, talking about a future that was uncertain but possible, allowing themselves to finally believe that maybe, just maybe, they deserved to be happy. The 30th day arrived inexorably. Genevieve woke in the blue room for the last time, allowing herself to feel the loss it represented. These walls had sheltered her when she had nowhere else to go. This bed had comforted her on lonely nights. Mary helped her dress, tears streaming silently down her young face. We'll miss you, miss. The castle was happier with you here, and I was happier here than I thought possible. Mrs. Winters waited in the hall, her maternal expression firm, but her eyes bright. Do you have everything you need? Tea for the journey? Extra blankets? I have everything, Mrs. Winters, thank you. For everything. The housekeeper pulled her into a tight hug, breaking protocol. He's different because of you, child. For the first time in 4 years, I've seen him genuinely laugh. Don't let him go back to being the Iron Duke. I'll do my best. Sebastian waited in the main hall, dressed formally, as if they were strangers again. But when he looked at her, there was nothing strange in his eyes. Ready? Yes. He picked up a document from the sideboard. Before you go, I must do this formally. He turned to the lit fireplace, holding the original contract, the one signed at the gentleman's retreat 30 nights ago. He looked at Genevieve one last time. 30 nights. His voice echoed in the room. They were simultaneously the longest and shortest period of my life. I thought it would be an anthropological experiment, observing human degradation. But you taught me that degradation and dignity are not opposites. They are choices. He tore the contract in half, then in quarters, in eighths. He let the pieces fall into the fireplace, where they caught fire immediately, turning to ash. You are free, Genevieve Marguerite Ashford, of all obligations, all debts, all contracts. What happens now is entirely your choice. Genevieve stepped forward, extending her hand formally, as if they were acquaintances being introduced for the first time. Then until London, Your Grace. I eagerly await your appropriate courtship. He took her hand, kissing it with a reverence that was half formality, half adoration. Until London, Miss Ashford. Aunt Genevieve, his eyes met hers. Thank you for teaching me the difference between possessing and loving, between a transaction and a choice, between existing and living. Thank you for giving me the time to discover who I am when I'm not just surviving. The carriage waited in the courtyard. Her luggage was already loaded. Sebastian escorted her, helping her inside. His fingers lingered an extra moment on her hand. 1 week, he said. I'll give you 1 week. Then prepare to be invaded by florists and invitations to every theatre and museum in London. I can hardly wait. The door closed. The coachman cracked the reins. The carriage began to move. Genevieve looked out the back window, watching Sebastian grow smaller, a solitary figure in the vast courtyard. He waved once, slow and deliberate. She waved back, tears finally coming now that she could no longer be seen. The carriage passed under the gate, down the winding cliff road. Thornhill Castle disappeared from view, hidden by curves and trees. But Genevieve did not feel empty. She felt full, of memories, of possibilities, of dangerous hope. 30 nights had changed everything. Now the rest of her life was waiting to be lived. And for the first time since she was 12 years old, Genevieve allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't just survival. It was something close to happiness. The townhouse in Bloomsbury Square was everything Sebastian had promised and more. 3 floors of red brick, tall windows overlooking the park, elegant but comfortable furniture. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, a 50-year-old widow with kind eyes and a sharp, practical sense, welcomed her warmly. "Miss Ashford, welcome. Your home is prepared." And I must say it's refreshing to accompany a young woman with her own purpose. The first few days were an adjustment. London was unlike anything Genevieve had ever known. The constant noise of carriages, street vendors, life pulsing on every corner. At Ashford Manor, days passed in rural silence. At Thornhill there was majestic isolation. Here there was humanity in all its chaotic glory. Genevieve explored the city methodically. She visited the British Museum, losing herself among Egyptian mummies and the Elgin marbles. She walked through Hyde Park, watching London society on display. She discovered bookshops on Charing Cross Road, where she could spend hours, and she began to paint. The room on the 3rd floor, flooded with perfect northern light, became her studio. She painted London as she saw it. Not grand monuments, but everyday moments. A flower cellar in Covent Garden, children playing in Regent's Park, light filtering through the morning fog on the Thames. On the 5th night, a letter arrived. "My dearest Genevieve, I hope London is treating you well and that Mrs. Thompson is agreeable company. Thornhill is empty without you. Literally, I have begun to clear out the East Wing. I've discovered that without Isadora's ghosts watching, the castle breathes differently. I will respect the full week I promised, but know that each day feels like a year. The roses we planted are blooming. I wish you were here to see them." With deep affection, Sebastian Genevieve smiled, touching the paper as if she could feel a connection through it. She wrote a reply immediately. "My dearest Sebastian, London is fascinating but overwhelming. I find myself wishing for the silence of the gardens, the space to think. But I am also discovering strengths I didn't know I possessed. Yesterday I single-handedly negotiated with a shopkeeper who tried to overcharge me. I won. I paint daily. Perhaps one day I will show you my watercolors. Perhaps not, for now they are just mine. The roses have bloomed. I wish I could have seen them. But there will be other springs, other gardens. Patience, Your Grace. With equal affection, Genevieve." On the 7th day, exactly 1 week after her arrival, a sharp knock echoed on the door. Mrs. Thompson answered, returning with a conspiratorial smile. "Miss Ashford, you have a visitor. A very persistent one. He insists he has an engagement." Genevieve descended the staircase, her heart racing. Sebastian stood in the entryway, holding an enormous bouquet of white and pink roses, dressed impeccably in light grey. "Miss Ashford," he bowed formally, "I have come to request permission to court you properly. Would you be available for a walk through Hyde Park this afternoon?" She kept her expression serious, though she wanted to smile. "Your Grace, isn't this terribly sudden? We have only known each other for... how long has it been? 30 nights. But who's counting? Someone extremely impatient, apparently." He smiled, that rare smile that transformed his entire face. "Guilty. So? A walk? Mrs. Thompson must accompany us naturally. Naturally. It would be improper otherwise." Genevieve accepted the roses, inhaling them deeply. "Are they from the garden?" "From our garden. I thought you would like to know they continue to bloom without us." "Then yes, Your Grace, I accept your invitation." The walk in Hyde Park was surreal. The whole of London society seemed to be there, parading on Rotten Row. As Sebastian and Genevieve passed, conversations ceased. Stares followed. Whispers erupted as soon as they were out of earshot. "Is that her? The girl who stayed at Thornhill? I heard her father sold her to pay gambling debts. He's courting her. The Iron Duke? Scandalous. Absolutely scandalous." Genevieve kept her head high, ignoring the gossip. Sebastian at her side seemed equally indifferent. "Does this bother you?" he asked quietly. "The gossip? Yes, but it won't stop me. And you?" "I spent 4 years being whispered about as a possible wife murderer. This is a gentle breeze by comparison." In the following days and weeks, Sebastian was meticulously respectful. He visited 3 times a week, always with Mrs. Thompson present. He took her to the opera, to lectures at the Royal Society, to art exhibitions. They talked about everything: politics, philosophy, science. He challenged her opinions. She challenged his. They argued heatedly about women's suffrage. He cautiously supportive but worried about the backlash. About educational reform, both enthusiastically pro. About British imperialism, both increasingly critical. Genevieve discovered that outside of Thornhill, Sebastian was even more fascinating. He had a dry wit that surfaced at unexpected moments. He laughed at himself. He admitted when he was wrong. He was a man, not just a title, a person, not just a trauma. 2 months after her arrival in London, Genevieve received an unexpected visit. Lady Sarah Pemberton, a known social reformer and advocate for women's education, a distant cousin of Lady Rosalind, but apparently of a completely different temperament. "Miss Ashford, I've heard of your interest in a foundation for women's education. Would you be interested in discussing a partnership?" Thus began a new phase. Genevieve dove into charitable work, discovering a passion for social reform she never knew she possessed. With Lady Sarah as her mentor, she began outlining plans for the Ashford Foundation. Sebastian supported her enthusiastically, both financially and by offering political connections. But he let her lead, refusing to take credit. "It's your dream," he said, "your work. I am merely facilitating where necessary." 5 months after leaving Thornhill, in the spring of 1878, Genevieve organized her first exhibition of her watercolors in a small Bloomsbury gallery. She had expected half a dozen polite visitors. The gallery was packed. Her paintings of London, of wild gardens, of forgotten moments, resonated with the public in a way she had never anticipated. And Sebastian was there, of course, standing before a watercolor of the Thornhill Gardens, his eyes moist. "You captured something I couldn't see when I was there," he said softly. "You captured hope. I learned that from you." He turned to face her, right there in the crowded gallery, with London society watching. He knelt. The silence was instant and absolute. "Genevieve Marguerite Ashford," he said clearly, his voice carrying through the room. "For the past 5 months you have shown me that second chances are not fantasies. They are realities built with patience and courage. You would honor me immeasurably if you would agree to become my wife. Not by obligation, not by transaction, but by mutual choice. By love." Genevieve looked down at him, at the watching society, at the future unfolding in infinite possibilities. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and firm. 1,000 times yes, applause erupted around them. But Genevieve heard only the beat of her own heart, felt only the warmth of Sebastian's arms, as he lifted her and spun her around, laughing for the first time in public since he had buried Isadora. The engagement was officially announced in the Times a week later. Society's reaction was mixed. Some saw her as a clever fortune hunter, others as a victim rescued by the repentant Duke. Few saw the truth, 2 imperfect individuals choosing to build something together. But Genevieve didn't care about others' opinions. She had Sebastian. She had purpose. She had a future. One shadow, however, remained: her father. Augustus Ashford was living modestly in Bath, supported by a stipend Sebastian had established. Genevieve had not spoken to him since leaving Ashford Manor. "I need to confront him," she told Sebastian one rainy afternoon. "Before we marry, I need to close that door completely. Do you want me to accompany you?" "No, this I must do alone." The trip to Bath was short but felt eternal. The boarding house where Augustus lived was respectable but modest, a world away from the grandeur of Ashford Manor. He answered the door after the second knock, visibly aged. His hair was completely grey now, his face marked by years of excess. "Jenny," his voice broke, "you came. Don't call me that. You no longer have the right." They entered the small apartment. It smelled of mildew and defeat. "I heard about the engagement," Augustus said, pouring himself a whiskey with trembling hands. "You managed it after all." "Just as I planned." "Stop." Genevieve's voice was ice. "Do not dare suggest this was your plan. Your plan was to sell me as a prostitute to save your own skin. What happened after was in spite of you, not because of you. I am your father. You were my father." Past tense. "When you decided your gambling debts were more important than your daughter, when you signed that contract at the gentleman's retreat, you stopped being my father." Augustus collapsed into a chair, his face in his hands. I know I failed you terribly, but I was an addict, Genevieve. I still am. I think about gambling every day. The only reason I don't is that your Duke's stipend is carefully structured to prevent it, and that is supposed to make me feel better. No, nothing can." He looked up at her, tears streaming. "But I want you to know that when I look in the mirror, I see a monster. I know what I did. And if I could go back—" "You can't. There is no going back. Only consequences." Genevieve pulled an envelope from her pocket, placing it on the table between them. "This is a copy of the legal document Sebastian prepared. Ashford Manor has been sold to pay the remaining debts. Your stipend of £200 annually continues until your death, but it is in a trust. You cannot touch it directly. You cannot gamble it away. And what about you? When I inherit—" "Nothing. There is nothing to inherit, and if there were, it would go to charity. Specifically to the Ashford Foundation for Women's Education, as I am using our family name not for honor, but as a reminder that women are not property. They are not currency. They are not payment for debts. Augustus closed his eyes. You're right. About everything. I'm grateful that at least you are well, that you found happiness despite me. Not because of you. Never because of you. Genevieve rose to leave. At the door she stopped, looking back one last time. Goodbye, Augustus Reginald Ashford. I hope you find peace at some point before you die. But it will not be with me. She closed the door softly. She didn't slam it. She didn't yell. She just closed it, deliberately and definitively. In the carriage back to London, she allowed herself to cry. Not for grief, but for release. That chapter was finally truly closed. The next morning, Sebastian found her in the studio, painting furiously. How was it? Necessary, painful, final? Do you regret it? Going. Know what he did always. But I cannot carry the weight of his choices any more than I already have. Sebastian wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. You are the strongest woman I know. I'm not strong. I'm just a survivor who decided she deserved more than survival. And now? What do you deserve now? She turned in his arms, smiling. Happiness, love, partnership, gardens and books and conversations into the small hours, challenges and support, failures and fresh starts. That I can give, and I can give it back. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning in 1878, exactly 1 year after that dreadful night at the gentleman's retreat, where it all began. It was not an elaborate ceremony. Just close friends in the private chapel at Thornhill Castle, Mrs. Winters cried. Mrs. Thompson smiled approvingly. Lady Sarah Pemberton served as Genevieve's witness. Genevieve wore a simple dress of ivory satin, her hair loose and cascading down her back, a crown of white roses from the gardens they had cultivated together. Sebastian was in formal black, but there was a lightness to him that hadn't existed a year before. He smiled as she walked down the aisle. Not a restrained smile, but a radiant, transformative one. The vows were traditional, but when it came time to promise love and fidelity, Sebastian added quietly, just for her, and I promise never to treat you as a transaction, only as an equal, a partner and the love of my life. Genevieve held his hands tightly. I promise to challenge you when you need to be challenged, to support you when you need strength, and to always remember that we were broken and we fixed each other, that this is a choice, renewed every day. I now pronounce you husband and wife. The kiss was soft, tender, a promise of futures together. The reception was joyful but intimate. They ate cake, drank champagne and danced in the salon that had witnessed so much pain, now transformed into a space of celebration. As night fell, Sebastian took her to the gardens. The October roses were still blooming, defiant, beautiful in their last burst before winter. I want to show you something, he said. He led her to a part of the garden that had been closed off during the restoration work. When he opened the gate, Genevieve gasped. A new garden space, planted according to her designs he had found in her sketchbooks. There was lavender, sage, ancient roses, a new stone bench under a rebuilt pergola, and in the center a fountain with a bronze plaque. Genevieve moved closer, reading the inscription. The Gardens of Genevieve where wild love blooms, October 1877, October 1878. From what was servitude, grew freedom from what was a contract, grew choice from what was a transaction, grew love. Tears streamed down her face. Sebastian, you brought life to these gardens. You brought life to me. I wanted something to honor that. It's perfect. They sat on the new bench, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Any regrets? He asked softly. About which part? The 30 nights I thought would be hell but showed me who I could be. The journey I thought would end in ruin but finished here. Loving the man I thought would be my jailer but became my freedom. Any part? Never. She kissed him softly. You were the best investment I ever made. I bet on us and I won a future. No, Genevieve, I didn't bet on you. You set me free so I could bet on us. October 1880. Thornhill Castle had been transformed. The East Wing, once a shrine to ghosts, now housed a thriving school. 24 young women studied literature, mathematics, science, art and estate management. The Ashford Foundation had blossomed beyond Genevieve's wildest expectations. With Sebastian's funding and Lady Sarah Pemberton's support, it had established schools in 3 cities. Progressive curricula prepared women not just for marriage, but for professions, independence and choices. Sebastian argued passionately in the House of Lords for educational and labor reforms. He won some battles, lost others, but never gave up. The Thornhill Gardens were living works of art. Genevieve managed them with a small team, maintaining the balance between order and wildness that had become the house's signature. And in the library at dusk on a cold October day, Sebastian was reading to Genevieve, who was reclined on a sofa, her hands resting protectively on a round 5-month belly. "Any regrets?" he asked, closing the book. "About what?" She smiled, the same ritual question that had become their private joke. "About anything. About everything. About me. About you? Never. About the circumstances that brought us together? Always. But I wouldn't change a thing, because changing it would lead us somewhere other than here." Sebastian knelt beside the sofa, kissing her belly softly. "Hello, little one. Your father here reminding you that when you grow up, you will never be a transaction. You will always be a choice. You will always be loved." Genevieve ran her fingers through his hair, now threaded with silver at the temples. "You talk to her every night. How do you know it's a her?" "Maternal intuition. We're having a daughter. Strong, defiant, brilliant like her father, artistic like her mother, and independent like them both, especially that." A letter had arrived that morning from Bath. Augustus Ashford had passed away in his sleep, heart failure compounded by years of alcohol abuse. The funeral would be private. Genevieve would not be going. She had sent flowers and a brief note expressing formal condolences to the distant relatives who had surfaced to handle the details. "Should I feel more?" she had asked Sebastian. "No, you feel what you feel. Grief is an honor we pay to those we loved. He lost the right to that when he sold you." Now, in the comfortable silence of the library with the fire crackling, Genevieve allowed herself to reflect on the impossible journey that had brought her here. 30 nights that should have been a curse had become a blessing in disguise. A contract that should have destroyed her had set her free. A man who should have used her had taught her true love. "A penny for your thoughts," Sebastian said, sitting beside her, pulling her into a protective embrace. "I was thinking that if someone had told me 3 years ago that I would be happy, truly deeply happy, I would have laughed. Or cried. Happiness seemed like a luxury for people who didn't have to just survive. And now I know that happiness isn't the absence of pain. It's the choice to build something beautiful, even after pain has done its worst. It's a garden growing in ruins. It's love blooming in unlikely soil. You taught me that. No, we learned it together. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, white flakes dancing through the last of the daylight. The gardens, prepared for winter, would rest until spring. But inside Thornhill Castle, there was warmth, purpose. A love that was chosen daily, renewed in every small act of kindness, every deep conversation, every challenge accepted and overcome together. Genevieve Marguerite Thornhill, Duchess of Thornhill, closed her eyes safe in her husband's arms, feeling the life grow inside her. And for the first time in her entire life, she did not wish to be anywhere else. She was home. Not just in a castle of stone, but in the choices she had made, in the love she had built, in the person she had become. Of the 330 nights since it all began, each one had taught a different lesson. But the most important one of all was this: dignity cannot be bought or sold. Love is not a transaction, it is a transformation. And sometimes, the darkest beginnings lead to the brightest endings. If only we have the courage to choose the light when darkness seems inevitable. Genevieve had that courage. She always had. She just needed 30 nights to discover it.